The bridge of the Silver Accord was silent, save for the faint hum of its engines. Alias Trevor stood at the forward viewport, staring into the void. Debris floated in the distance, twisted fragments of once mighty ships, scattered like ashes from a pyre. Human and alien vessels alike drifted lifelessly, their crews lost to the madness of war. He ran a hand over his tired face, his reflection staring back at him with hollow eyes. This was victory, they said. Survival at an unthinkable cost. Behind him, Maya Voss approached, her voice low to avoid disturbing the heavy air. She handed him a tablet displaying casualty reports and logistical data. He didn't need to look to know what it said. Another colony wiped out. Another fleet reduced to scrap. Another reminder that humanity teetered on the brink of extinction. The message that had brought them to this moment replayed in his mind. An invitation, or perhaps a summons, to Zerinthilion. The Dyson Sphere, abandoned by its creators millennia ago, was a monument to a civilization that had ascended beyond understanding. Now it served as a battleground for politics, a neutral ground where peace might be negotiated. Might, Trevor thought bitterly, if we survive long enough to even try. Maya broke his reverie with a question. She asked if he believed the factions would listen, if they would truly come to the table. He didn't answer right away, instead gesturing at the wreckage outside. This, he said, was the only thing that might convince them. The threat of annihilation, the endless cycle of destruction. Perhaps they were as tired of it as humanity was. Their conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of the ship's communication system. Commander Hedrick's voice crackled over the speakers, announcing that their escort fleet was in formation. 4 other ships, battered but functional, flanked the Silver Accord. It was a pitiful display compared to the grand armadas of the alien factions, yet it carried the weight of humanity's last hope. As Trevor turned to leave the bridge, an alert flashed on the main console. Voss examined it, her brow furrowing. An encrypted message had been received, its origin untraceable. It contained only a single line. Beware the silence of the sphere. The words sent a chill down Trevor's spine. He ordered the message decrypted and logged, though he doubted it would yield any answers. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Hours later, as the Silver Accord entered the outer reaches of Zerinthilion's system, the Dyson Sphere emerged from the shadows. Its vast structure, broken and glimmering faintly in the light of its captured star, seemed alive. Tendrils of energy arced across its surface, illuminating deep fissures that hinted at catastrophic damage. The crew fell silent as they approached, awestruck by the sheer scale of the construct. Trevor broke the silence, instructing the team to prepare for their arrival. His voice was steady, but his mind churned with doubt. The ruins of victory had brought them here, but would they find salvation, or something far worse? The Silver Accord drifted into the shadow of Zerinthilion, its immense surface reflecting starlight in fractured patterns. To the human crew, it looked less like a station and more like the carcass of a long-dead god. Alias Trevor stood at the command deck, his gaze fixed on the Dyson Sphere's jagged horizon. The docking sequence was transmitted from Zerinthilion's automated systems, its instructions precise but sterile. No life greeted them, only cold, unfeeling machinery that echoed the emptiness of the structure. The sphere had been abandoned for millennia, yet its systems operated with eerie precision. Maya Voss entered the room, tablet in hand. She reported anomalies in the sphere's energy readings. While most of its systems appeared dormant, intermittent spikes suggested areas of localized activity deep within. Trevor nodded but kept his thoughts to himself. He couldn't shake the feeling that the sphere wasn't as abandoned as it seemed. The human delegation prepared for disembarkation. Alongside Trevor and Voss was Dr. Arlen Jorvik, who studied the Dyson Sphere's internal schematics displayed on his wrist device. The scientist muttered to himself, noting the improbable complexity of the structure. Every corridor seemed to shift subtly, as if the sphere was alive and observing its visitors. They docked at the assigned bay, a cavernous chamber lined with dim, flickering lights. The delegation stepped onto the cold metallic floor, the sound of their footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence. The chamber stretched into darkness, with only faint beacons guiding their path. The first alien delegation to arrive was the Kareth Dominion. Their ship, sleek and bristling with weaponry, docked with military precision. Kareth warriors emerged, towering figures clad in obsidian armor. They moved with discipline, their gazes scanning for threats. Their leader, Prefect Ralon, stood at the front, a figure of cold authority with sharp features and piercing yellow eyes. He acknowledged Drever with a curt nod before turning his attention to the sphere's surroundings. Next came the Tilash Accord, their vessel adorned with intricate patterns that shimmered like liquid silver. The Tilash delegation moved with unsettling grace, their elongated forms draped in ceremonial garb that glowed faintly in the dark. And Voixenar, their chief representative, regarded the humans with thinly veiled disdain, his voice resonating with an artificial calm. The Matrellan swarm followed, their arrival marked by a low, resonant hum that filled the chamber. The insectoid creatures moved as one, their chitinous forms clicking faintly against the floor. Their queen, Shaytelk, spoke through a translator drone, her words sharp and deliberate. She dismissed the humans as inconsequential, focusing instead on the Kareth and Tilash, her multifaceted eyes narrowing with suspicion. As the delegations gathered, Drever stepped forward, his voice calm but commanding. He welcomed them to the talks, emphasizing the shared goal of ending the wars that had ravaged them all. The alien leaders exchanged glances, their mistrust evident. Sinar broke the silence, questioning humanity's authority to mediate such talks. Before Drever could respond, a sudden tremor rippled through the chamber. The lights flickered, and a low vibration echoed from the depths of the sphere. All eyes turned to the shadows, where something ancient stirred. The tremor subsided as quickly as it had begun, but its echoes lingered in the minds of everyone present. Drever steadied himself, scanning the alien leaders for their reactions. Prefect Relon barked an order to his warriors, who immediately assumed defensive positions, weapons trained on the shadows. And Voixenar looked unfazed, though the faint flicker of his bioluminescent patterns betrayed unease. Queen Shaytel clicked her mandibles in irritation, her drone buzzing softly as it translated her command to assess the chamber's stability. Drever stepped forward, raising his hands in a gesture of calm. He assured them it was likely a structural anomaly, not uncommon in ancient constructs like Zyranthilion. His words hung in the air, unconvincing even to himself. The vibration had felt deliberate, almost like a warning. Maya Vost stood apart, her eyes scanning the glyphs etched into the chamber's walls. Her translator implant struggled to decode them, offering fragments of meaning, phrases like witness cycle and judgment waits. She made a note to study them later, but the implications gnawed at her. As the delegations regrouped, Zynar's soft, resonant voice cut through the tense air. He suggested that perhaps humanity had lured them here under false pretenses, using the sphere's ancient power as a weapon of coercion. The accusation hung heavy, and Drever could feel the room shift against him. Relon turned his piercing gaze on Drever, demanding an explanation for the tremor. The Kareth valued strength above all, and any sign of deceit would not go unanswered. Drever stood firm, calmly reiterating humanity's position as neutral mediators with no intention of manipulating the sphere or its systems. He invited the other delegations to investigate freely, knowing transparency was their only shield against such accusations. While the tension eased, Voss's datapad buzzed with a new alert. She glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing as she read the results of a structural scan conducted moments before. Deep within the sphere, localized energy spikes were forming patterns that mimicked signals. She leaned toward Drever, whispering her findings. He nodded, his expression darkening. The arrival of the Matrolin Queen's emissary interrupted their quiet exchange. The drone relayed a discovery: faint traces of advanced nanotechnology detected in the chamber. The Queen suggested it was human-made, her tone sharp with accusation. Drever responded swiftly, pointing out that humanity lacked the resources to deploy such sophisticated tools. He suggested it could be remnants of the sphere's creators, but the explanation failed to satisfy. The moment was broken by a sudden commotion near the docking bay. One of the Kareth warriors, stationed to secure their ship, burst into the chamber, shouting in his guttural tongue. Relon translated grimly. A hidden device had been discovered near their vessel. It bore traces of human engineering. The accusations flared once more. Finar demanded an immediate inquiry, while Shaitel hissed in anger, her swarm shifting restlessly. Drever insisted humanity had no involvement, but the seeds of doubt were already planted. Voss approached him again, her voice low. She had cross-referenced the device's signal with the encrypted message they received earlier. The results were unsettling. It matched. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and humanity was the scapegoat. Drever knew the peace talks were teetering on a knife's edge. He glanced toward the alien leaders, their mutual suspicion rekindled, and then to the darkened corridors of the sphere. Something, or someone, was orchestrating this chaos, and time was running out to uncover the truth. The air in the chamber grew heavy with mistrust. Alien guards tightened their grips on weapons, their eyes darting to every shadow. Tensions rippled between the delegations, each suspecting betrayal. Drever raised his hands, his voice cutting through the rising noise. He urged calm, insisting that the device must be investigated before assigning blame. Relon's glare softened, though his tone remained sharp. He agreed to delay action, but warned that any further incidents would mean an immediate end to the talks. Sinar, however, was less convinced. He accused humanity of staging this entire negotiation as a distraction while laying groundwork for their ascendancy. Before Drever could respond, Queen Shaitel interjected, her drone translating her low, chittering tones. She declared that the Matrellan swarm had little interest in verbal posturing. They would examine the device themselves and uncover its origin. With that, her swarm dispersed, their segmented forms slipping into the shadows of the docking bay. Voss approached Drever as the tension ebbed, her voice urgent. She revealed that the glyphs she'd been studying hinted at a surveillance system embedded within the sphere. If it still functioned, it might hold evidence of who planted the device. Drever ordered her to investigate while he worked to keep the talks from imploding. As the delegations dispersed to their respective quarters, the Silver Accord's crew examined the device. Jorvik joined the effort, his scientific expertise invaluable. His initial findings were alarming. The nanotechnology bore unmistakable traces of human design, but its sophistication exceeded anything Earth had produced. It was advanced, experimental, and likely fabricated by rogue factions operating outside the Terran Council's oversight. Drever's worst fears solidified. Humanity's fragile position in the talks had been weaponized by someone aiming to derail the peace process. He instructed Jorvik to keep his findings classified for now. If the Kareth or T-Lash learned of this, they might abandon diplomacy entirely. Meanwhile, Voss delved deeper into the sphere's systems, following the faint traces of a network buried beneath layers of ancient code. She discovered a terminal deep within a disused corridor, its interface flickering faintly. Her translator implant struggled to keep up as the machine's language evolved in real time, but she managed to activate a partial surveillance feed. The recordings were grainy and distorted, but one sequence stood out. An unidentified figure, clad in an armored suit with no discernible insignia, moved through the docking bay. They placed the device near the Kareth ship before vanishing into the shadows. The timestamp indicated it had occurred just hours before the delegations arrived. Voss transmitted the data to Drever, her message accompanied by a warning. Whoever this saboteur was, they had intimate knowledge of the sphere's layout and the delegation's movements. This wasn't just sabotage, it was manipulation on a grand scale. As Drever reviewed the footage, alarms blared across the Dyson sphere. An automated voice, ancient yet chillingly clear, announced an intruder breach in the sphere's central core. The peace talks were unraveling, and now the sphere itself was awakening. Drever's heart pounded as he realized that diplomacy was no longer the only game being played. The announcement echoed through the Dyson sphere, its chilling monotone reverberating in the metallic walls. Delegations scrambled from their quarters, alien leaders flanked by their guards, weapons at the ready. Drever moved quickly, meeting Voss near the surveillance terminal she had uncovered. She pointed to the screen, which displayed a growing energy surge in the sphere's central core. Jorvik arrived moments later, his expression grim. He explained that the sphere's internal systems were reacting to something, perhaps the intruder or the device. The energy readings weren't random, they formed a deliberate pattern. He hesitated before suggesting the obvious. The sphere's ancient intelligence might still be functional, assessing its new occupants. Drever relayed the news to the alien delegations, convening an emergency meeting in the primary chamber. Prefect Rulon was skeptical, accusing humanity of triggering the sphere's systems through their incompetence. And Voixinar, ever calculating, suggested that the sphere might be responding to the cumulative presence of warring factions. Queen Shaytelk offered no opinion, her multifaceted eyes unreadable as she observed the rising tension. Suddenly, the chamber trembled, and a low hum filled the air. The walls flickered with light, alien glyphs illuminating in cascading patterns. Voss's translator struggled to keep pace, deciphering fragments that spoke of a trial, a witness, and judgment. Jorvik's earlier theory gained weight. The Dyson sphere wasn't merely a neutral ground. It was an active participant, and its intentions were far from clear. A deep, resonant pulse rippled through the station, sending shivers down spines. The energy surge had reached its apex, and with it came a vivid projection in the air. A shimmering figure materialized, faceless yet imposing, composed of luminous particles. Its presence silenced the room as it regarded the assembled delegations. The projection emitted a series of tones, incomprehensible at first. Then, slowly, it shifted to recognizable language patterns, addressing the room in a synthesized voice. It declared that Zuranthillion had been designed not as a weapon, but as a proving ground. Its creators had left it behind to assess the civilizations that dared enter its domain. Those deemed worthy would earn the sphere's secrets. Those who failed would face annihilation. The factions erupted in argument. Relon accused the Tilash of bringing this judgment upon them, while Theinar suggested the Karath's warlike nature was to blame. Shaytelk remained silent, her focus seemingly elsewhere. Drever, standing at the center of the storm, raised his voice above the chaos. He demanded unity, reminding them that the sphere's creators had left no room for individual survival. Either they worked together, or they all perished. The projection flickered, its gaze turning directly to Drever. It seemed to respond to his words, emitting another pulse that sent waves of hallucinations through the delegations. Each individual was confronted with their deepest fears, their most painful memories. Alien leaders and human diplomats alike fell to their knees, overwhelmed by the weight of their collective trauma. Drever fought through the visions, his mind racing. The sphere wasn't just testing their unity, it was forcing them to confront the flaws that had fueled their wars. He rose to his feet, shouting into the void, declaring that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to adapt and overcome. The projection paused, its luminous form dimming briefly, as if considering his words. Then, with a flash, it vanished. The sphere's hum quieted, but its glyphs continued to glow faintly. The delegation stood in stunned silence. The trial had begun, and their survival depended on their next move. The silence that followed the projection's disappearance was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the sphere's systems. Delegates exchanged wary glances, their faces marked by the aftershocks of the vision. Drever stood resolute, though his mind churned with uncertainty. Whatever trial the sphere had initiated, it wasn't over. Maya Voss broke the silence, her voice sharp but measured. She pointed out that the projection's message implied there was a path to survival, a way to prove their collective worth. Jorvik nodded in agreement, adding that the energy patterns in the sphere suggested a deliberate sequence of events. The trial was a test, one with rules they had yet to decipher. Before they could formulate a plan, another pulse rippled through the station. The lights dimmed, and the glyphs on the walls shifted, morphing into an elaborate star map. The map highlighted 3 regions within the sphere, each marked by a glowing sigil. The projection's voice returned, cold and precise, declaring these to be the domains of judgment. The Kereth, Tilash, and Matrolin each recognized elements within the sigils, symbols from their histories, long thought to be myths. Relon claimed one represented the Kereth's ancient trials of strength, while Kynar noted another resembled Tilash legends of intellectual ascension. Shaitelk, for the first time, spoke directly, her translator drone relaying that the final domain bore resemblance to the swarm's primal rites of unity. Drever realized the test was tailored to the assembled factions, a challenge rooted in their respective cultural values. But humanity had no such sigil, no predefined domain. The implication was clear: their role was to mediate, to bridge the divides between these disparate powers. The delegations reluctantly agreed to explore the domains, each faction taking the lead in the trial they claimed as their own. Drever insisted that a representative from each species accompany one another, ensuring transparency and fostering collaboration. It was a precarious plan, but the only one with a chance of success. The first domain, the trial of strength, took them deep into the sphere's core. The environment shifted as they entered, a massive arena surrounded by walls that pulsed with energy. The Kereth warriors took point, their confidence evident. The trial demanded combat, but not against each other. Instead, the arena spawned constructs, automated guardians of the sphere, ancient and relentless. The Kereth fought with ferocity, their prowess undeniable. Yet as the battle raged, it became clear that brute strength alone would not suffice. The constructs adapted, countering the Kereth's every move. Voss analyzed their patterns, relaying strategies to outmaneuver the machines. The combined efforts of all factions, each contributing their unique strengths, eventually overwhelmed the Guardians. As the trial concluded, the sigil for the domain dimmed, replaced by a glowing orb. Jorvik examined it, determining it to be a key, one of 3 required to complete the sphere's test. Drever glanced at the remaining domains, their sigils glowing ominously. Each trial would push them to their limits, demanding cooperation in ways they had never attempted. The sphere wasn't testing just their abilities. It was forcing them to confront their deepest flaws and to rise above them. The first trial had been a victory, but the hardest challenges still lay ahead. The second domain, the trial of intellect, was a stark contrast to the brutal arena they had just survived. The delegation entered a vast chamber filled with floating constructs, their surfaces shifting with alien symbols and equations. A low hum filled the air, accompanied by pulses of light that danced across the room like the rhythm of a vast, unknowable intelligence. Envoy Xinar stepped forward, his voice calm as he claimed this domain for the Tilash. He explained that such puzzles were intrinsic to their species, designed to test the sharpest minds and elevate leaders through intellect rather than might. Drever insisted on collaboration, and Xinar begrudgingly allowed representatives from each faction to assist. The chamber itself was alive, responding to their presence with puzzles that seemed to evolve as they solved them. The first challenge required decoding a complex mathematical pattern to stabilize the floating constructs. Jorvik led the effort, his human ingenuity blending with Sinar's methodical approach. Even the Karath, unused to intellectual trials, found a role, using their advanced sensors to detect hidden patterns in the shifting symbols. As they progressed, the puzzles grew more intricate, weaving in philosophical dilemmas. The final challenge presented them with a simulation, an entire civilization on the brink of collapse, its fate resting on their collective decisions. Each faction brought their values to the table. Raelon advocated for strength and order, Sinar for calculated sacrifice, and Shai-Talk emphasized unity above all else. Drever found himself mediating their disagreements, blending their perspectives into a single cohesive plan. The simulation ended with a glowing sigil, a sign they had passed the trial. The chamber rewarded them with another orb, identical to the one from the Trial of Strength. As the orb was secured, a deep rumble shook the domain. The lights dimmed, and the glyphs flickered erratically. Voss's datapad buzzed as she scanned the disturbance. She revealed that the sphere systems were growing unstable, the energy from the trials pushing its ancient machinery to its limits. Their moment of triumph was short-lived as an alarm blared across the chamber. A holographic display flickered to life, showing the third domain, the Trial of Unity. The Matrellan delegation had entered without waiting for the others, and now they were in peril. The scene showed a massive structure, twisting and alive with energy. Shai-Talk's swarm was scattered, struggling to navigate the environment. Without assistance, they would fail, and the sphere's judgment would fall on all. Drever turned to the delegations, his voice firm. He declared that survival required mutual trust, and that meant setting aside grudges to aid the Matrellan. Prefect Raelon hesitated, but the gravity of their situation left no room for debate. The factions agreed, following Drever into the final domain. The Trial of Unity loomed ahead, its challenges unknown. The true test, however, was not just for the Matrellan, but for all of them. If they could not stand together, Zurenthelian's judgment would be swift and absolute. The Trial of Unity was unlike the previous domains. As the delegations entered the chamber, they were confronted with a vast, shifting landscape, an ever-changing puzzle of corridors, platforms, and bridges suspended in a void. The floor beneath them seemed to pulse with energy, flickering in patterns that reminded Drever of an organic brain, its neural pathways constantly firing. The moment they stepped forward, the environment reacted. Paths materialized, then vanished, forcing the group to think and act as one. The initial shock of the trial was overwhelming. The platforms moved without warning, and the corridors twisted unpredictably, making it clear that the trial was designed to test their coordination and their ability to adapt. If even one faction failed to cooperate, the trial would reset, resetting the entire team's progress. The Karath, known for their brute strength and fierce independence, balked at the concept of collaboration. Prefect Raelon attempted to charge ahead, trying to force his way through, but the floor beneath him collapsed as soon as he stepped onto it alone. He barely managed to leap to another platform, cursing under his breath. His warriors, too, found the trial unnerving. The shifting paths made it impossible for them to charge ahead and assert dominance. Sinar, on the other hand, kept his cool, trying to analyze the patterns that governed the trial. His mind, honed by centuries of intellectual pursuit, focused on the rules rather than the chaos. But even he was stymied by the environment's unpredictability. Shai-Talk remained silent, her swarm circling her as if waiting for a signal. The Matrellan had always thrived on unity, yet even they were disoriented by the chaotic maze. Their collective hive mind, once an asset, became a hindrance in the constantly shifting terrain. Drever, realizing the urgency, called for a halt. He knew the only way forward was through collective effort, and the factions would have to trust each other, something none had done yet. He reminded them of what they had achieved in the previous trials. Success had come only when they combined their strengths. Think of this trial as an extension of that cooperation, Trevor urged. We have to adapt together. No one here is above the others. It was Raylon who spoke next, his voice taut with frustration. You speak of unity, human, but we have no common ground. You ask us to abandon centuries of warfare, of tradition. Thinnar added, his tone sharp, and we are supposed to trust the Matrillon? The swarm is unpredictable. But Trevor stood firm, emphasizing that this trial was not about individual strengths. Unity does not mean weakness, he said. It means we must find a way to harmonize our differences. Reluctantly, the factions began to follow his lead. The Kareth warriors, once bristly with arrogance, began to work alongside the Tilash's intellect. The Matrillon, ever vigilant, coordinated their swarm in ways that augmented their efficiency. Slowly but surely, the group began to navigate the labyrinthine corridors, moving as one. At last, they reached the center of the maze, where a massive crystalline structure stood, radiating with power. The orb they had collected from the previous domains fit perfectly into a slot at its heart. When placed, the structure pulsed with energy, sending a wave of light across the chamber. The walls dissolved, revealing a vast chamber filled with intricate machinery. The ancient creators of Zerinthilion had left behind their legacy, a gift to those who could prove their worth. The projection of the sphere's creators reappeared, their forms shimmering in the light. They spoke once more. You have passed the trials. Unity is your reward. You have proven that peace is not just possible, but inevitable. You are the future. As the sphere systems activated, the room hummed with newfound power. Trevor's heart swelled with hope, realizing that they had done it. They had brokered not only peace among the factions, but also earned the trust of Zerinthilion itself. The silent Concord had been forged. The delegation stood together, not as separate species, but as a united force. The galaxy had witnessed their unity, and now the peace they had so desperately sought was no longer a fragile dream, it was reality.